Hey guys, I get the feeling this one is going to be kind of like 9.1 where there'll be two videos, one for the notes and one for the assignment, but we'll have to see. For now, let's just go ahead and jump in. Grab your your math notebooks and your pencils and add line graphs to your table of contents with your page number. And as you're doing that, you might be thinking, Mrs. Graber, we've already talked about these. And you're sort of right. We talked about line plots, which were the ones with a straight line and then the x's above different numbers. A line graph is similar to a regular graph, like the ones that we did in 9.2 and 9.3, where we did plotting points and using ordered pairs and stuff. This is similar to that, and we are going to continue to use those, except the difference is that the line shows change over time. Basically what that means is that these particular graphs are used to show how something is changing. A lot of times, and the ones that we'll practice, talk about rainfall, and that's something that a lot of people like to chart, like to graph. And following the line on the line graph will show you how much rainfall there was, how little rainfall there was, what the difference is between them, and all that kind of stuff. So line graphs are really helpful for monitoring and looking at how things are changing over time. Okay, before we go much further, let's talk about graphs in general. Every graph you will see should have, let's see. Has a title, which we talked about in 9.2. And then this is something new. It also will have titles for the X and Y axes, for the X and Y axis. Those will have their own titles because we need to know what we're measuring. And the X and the Y tell us, here's what you're measuring on the bottom, here's what you're measuring on the top. So those have to have titles as well. And they also will have a scale. My computer doesn't like doing videos, I guess. And a scale. There we go. Okay. Basically, because this is a new word, the scale. Basically, the scale tells what you're counting, or tells what number you're counting. For each step. Okay. So the scale tells what number you're counting by for each step of the chart, for each little chunk between the lines. And the thing about having a scale is that it has to be equal steps. So if you're choosing to count by twos for the first few steps, you have to count by twos for the whole axis. It's not just chunk by chunk. You count by the same scale for the whole thing. Okay, let's see some examples here and put this vocab into practice. If you draw yourself a little coordinate plane here, let's just say that we're measuring rainfall. So that will be our title for the graph. and I am measuring the number of days of rain. So that will be my x-axis. So instead of writing x-axis down here, we're going to use number of days. We replace x-axis with the title. And the same thing will go for the y-axis. Let's say that we're measuring rainfall in inches. So we'll say, let me look at my notes here, amount, and I'm going to abbreviate that, amount in inches. Okay. And then we can go ahead and plot our data. So on day 1 we got 1 inch, on day 2 we got 2 inches, on day 3 we got 3 inches, or 3.5 I guess, it's kind of in the middle there. Okay, and then a line graph would look like this. Ba-bam! You just connect your data, and it's just following how much change happens over time. So on the 3rd day you have the most amount of rainfall, right? Now let's look at this. My x-axis has a scale by ones. 1, 2, 3. Let's say it was really rainy though, the week that we looked at the rainfall. Let's say instead of 1 through 4, we did this. So now on day 1 we got 2 inches, on day 2 we got 4 inches, and on day 3 we got like 7 inches because it's kind of in the middle there. So what scale are we going by for the y-axis then? By what? By 2s. Oops. Stop. Really sorry about this, you guys. By 2s. There we go. Okay, so your axes don't always have to have the same scale. Sometimes they do. Sometimes both of them will count by 1, sometimes both of them will count by 2s, but sometimes it's more appropriate to have your axes count by different things. So make sure that when we're graphing that you write down for which axis and what your scale is, and we'll look at that too. Okay, let's do an example. I want you to write this problem in your book so that you have it. Maybe. Karen is running a marathon. You know what I'm going to do? You have more time to write, but my video's on a timer, so I'm going to type the rest of this. Karen is running a marathon. 20 people begin the race together. That means they all start at the same time. The table shows how many runners were in the lead group every 5 miles. Write the data as ordered pairs. Choose a scale. Let's see, choose a scale and titles. And graph it. Okay, I know it looks like a lot, so pause the video and finish writing the question in your notebook. And then when you're ready to continue, hit play again. All right. So up here, it talks about a table. The table shows how many runners were in the lead group every 5 miles. A lot of times when you're graphing line plots, you'll see a table that looks something like this. It's got 2 parts to it. And this is really similar to what we saw in 9.3. So this is going to be miles ran and number of runners. Okay, and it said that they check on the runners every 5 miles. So after 5 miles, 10 miles, 15, 20, 25, and that's a full marathon, 25 miles. Okay, in the lead group, after the first 5 miles, all 20 of them were all still together in one big group. After 10 miles, 18 people were in that lead group. After 15 miles, there were 11. After 20 miles, there were only 9. And then 25, they were down to 8 people in that lead group. Now, if I were to put these into ordered pairs, I'd have to figure out what my chart would look like, what my graph would look like. So I'm just going to kind of draw this in here real quick. The nice thing about getting data from a table is that a lot of times they give you the titles for your X and Y axis. The title for our whole chart should be like marathon. Just decide what you're talking about. We're talking about a marathon. And they give us our X and Y axis here, but we have to know which is which. So, since we're talking about running here, typically the first column is going to be your X. And then the second column will be the Y. So if that's the case here, then I'm going to put those numbers on the bottom. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. And then down below, I won't be able to write it, but down below, you would put miles ran as your title. Okay, this title here, number of runners, would go up and down the side. And now we have to decide what scale we want. What should we go by for the side? This one was done for us. This one's done by 5s. So X scale by 5s. But what should the Y scale be? I see a couple even numbers in here. I'm looking at this number, and I want all of my data to fit. I don't want to have to do 20 little lines in here, because that's going to get really hard to do. So instead of doing a whole bunch of little tiny lines, I kind of want to have bigger chunks all together. So looking at this, I know that 4 goes into 8, and it also goes into 20, so I'm going to go by 4s, just because it's a little bit bigger chunk. 4... 8, 12, 16, 20. Now when you're graphing, you want your steps to be as equal as possible. When you're using graph paper, it's a lot easier, but when you're freehanding, make your steps as equal as possible. And then we would just go in, here, by 4s. Then we would just go in and start plotting our data. Here I have my first point. This is my X, this is my Y. So I would write an ordered pair of 5, 20. Okay, so when I'm graphing, run before you jump. Out 5, up 20. This is point 1. Go ahead and graph the rest of these. Write your ordered pairs on the side somewhere, but graph the rest of these. You'll have to kind of guess a little bit because we don't have all of our numbers over here. You'll just have to put them in where they go, or about where they go. 29, 25. And then to finish, you just connect your lines. I'm out of time for this video, so join me again in part 2 of 9.4 in a little bit.